Donald Trump's actions have always managed to capture attention, spark controversy, and dominate conversations across the world, but what makes this moment different is the scale and intensity of the impact his latest moves are generating. His decisions, statements, and strategies have not only shaken the political landscape of the United States but have also created ripples across international borders, sparking debates in parliaments, rattling foreign leaders, and leaving ordinary citizens questioning what comes next. These are not small or isolated actions confined within America's boundaries, rather, they are seismic shifts capable of altering global dynamics. When Trump speaks or acts, the reverberations are felt in economic markets, diplomatic circles, military strategies, and even the cultural conversations that define societies. It is as though every gesture and word becomes a detonator, setting off chain reactions that force the world to re-examine its assumptions, alliances, and direction. The weight of his influence cannot be denied, for even those who strongly oppose him are forced to acknowledge that he has an unmatched ability to command global attention. One action, one announcement, or one policy shift from Trump often triggers more conversations across continents than months of routine speeches from other leaders. This ability to dominate the global stage comes from a unique blend of charisma, unpredictability, and refusal to conform to political norms. Supporters see him as a bold truth-teller unafraid to confront powerful elites, while critics see him as reckless and dangerous. Either way, his moves shake the world because they disrupt the carefully constructed systems of control, diplomacy, and messaging that have governed international relations for decades. When Trump pushes forward, he forces everyone else, friends, rivals, and even neutrals, to adjust, respond, or react. Consider how his policies on trade, for example, redefined relationships between the United States and major economic powers. Tariffs and tough negotiations shook up long-standing arrangements that had been taken for granted, leaving countries scrambling to protect their interests and adapt to a new era of uncertainty. His foreign policy decisions, whether pulling out of agreements, threatening sanctions, or brokering unexpected alliances, destabilized the comfortable predictability of global diplomacy. Some nations found themselves emboldened, others were alarmed, but none could ignore the force of his actions. The shockwave spread through markets, where investors reacted swiftly to every announcement, and through communities, where ordinary people began to feel the impact of changing policies on jobs, prices, and opportunities. Beyond policy, Trump's rhetoric alone has a disruptive power few can match. When he takes to the stage or social media, he bypasses traditional filters and speaks directly to millions, often saying the unthinkable and challenging narratives the media has carefully shaped. His words ignite debates not only in the United States but across the globe, where leaders and citizens alike are forced to weigh in. Entire news cycles revolve around his statements, but the deeper issue is that his words often set the tone for international dialogue. Even silence from the media cannot erase the fact that these statements spread quickly and organically, fueled by people sharing, debating, and dissecting every word. Another factor that amplifies the global shockwaves of Trump's actions is the timing. The world today is more interconnected than ever, with instant communication, shared markets, and intertwined security concerns. A single move in Washington reverberates through London, Berlin, Beijing, and beyond within hours. Allies worry about shifting commitments, rivals adjust their strategies, and global institutions wonder how to maintain stability. Trump thrives on this interconnectedness because it gives his actions magnified weight. By refusing to follow scripted diplomacy, he creates a level of unpredictability that keeps both friends and foes off balance. That unpredictability is precisely what shakes the world the most. The cultural impact of Trump's actions also cannot be overlooked. Beyond governments and markets, his presence fuels cultural battles, identity debates, and social conflicts in countries far beyond America. In many nations, his name has become a symbol, either of defiance against global elites or of the dangers of populism. Conversations about nationalism, immigration, sovereignty, and free speech often invoke Trump's influence as an example, whether positively or negatively. This cultural penetration means his influence is not restricted to politics but stretches into art, media, education, and the daily lives of ordinary people. Every decision or action from him becomes part of a larger cultural dialogue, sparking rallies, protests, social media movements, and heated debates in cafes and classrooms. Critics often argue that Trump's moves are reckless and destabilizing, but even they cannot ignore that the world systems are being forced to adapt in response. By breaking norms and challenging structures that had grown complacent, he compels others to reveal their true positions and priorities. This exposure itself shakes the world because it reveals fault lines that had been papered over for years. Institutions that once appeared unshakable suddenly seem vulnerable, and alliances that seemed permanent are revealed to be fragile. In this sense, Trump's actions don't just shake the world temporarily, they expose the fragility of the systems holding it together. The silence of mainstream media in amplifying or even acknowledging certain Trump-related developments only intensifies the impact. When information is suppressed, people seek it elsewhere, and this creates parallel conversations outside the traditional channels. These underground or alternative discussions often gain even more traction because people sense that something significant is happening, something the mainstream outlets refuse to acknowledge. This silence ironically makes the shockwaves larger, as it creates suspicion, fuels curiosity, and pushes more people to dig deeper. When an action by Trump shakes the world but the media stays silent, the effect is magnified because people realize that the silence itself is a sign of how powerful and disruptive the event truly is. Ultimately, Trump's actions create global shockwaves because they pierce through the illusion of stability that political and media institutions try to maintain. Every decision and every statement forces a reaction, and those reactions expose hidden truths about global politics, economics, and culture. Whether it is through direct policy changes, bold rhetoric, or the refusal of media to acknowledge what has happened, the result is the same: the world cannot continue unchanged. His moves push leaders to reveal where they stand, markets to reveal their vulnerabilities, and societies to reveal their divisions. In this way, Trump does not just participate in global events, he reshapes them, setting off waves that travel farther and faster than anyone else's, and in doing so, he continually proves that his actions, whether loved or hated, have a force that the world cannot escape. Mainstream silence has become one of the most telling signs of our times, and nowhere is this clearer than in the way major media outlets deal with Trump. When something happens that shakes the foundations of politics, democracy, or even international relations, one would expect the media, the so-called watchdogs of power, to shine the brightest light on it, dissect it from every angle, and hold it up for public scrutiny. Yet again and again, we witness a strange phenomenon: selective silence. The very organizations that brand themselves as guardians of truth and transparency often fall completely quiet, offering minimal coverage, burying important developments, or spinning them in ways that diminish their significance. This silence speaks volumes, because it is not accidental. It exposes bias, reveals hidden agendas, and proves that the media is not as free and independent as it claims to be. When Trump makes moves that fit the preferred narrative of mainstream outlets, the coverage is relentless, almost suffocating. Every word is amplified, every gesture is analyzed, and every mistake is replayed on loop. But when Trump acts in ways that challenge powerful institutions, reveal corruption, or expose uncomfortable truths, suddenly the headlines vanish. Instead of front-page news, the events are treated as footnotes, buried beneath trivial stories or overshadowed by distractions carefully crafted to draw public attention elsewhere. This pattern of silence is not random. It is systematic. It demonstrates a clear preference for controlling the narrative rather than delivering raw truth. The silence becomes more striking when one realizes that it doesn't just involve ignoring a single event. It is often paired with efforts to discredit independent voices, alternative outlets, or citizen journalists who dare to speak about what the mainstream ignores. The goal is not simply to remain silent, but to ensure that the silence holds, that the truth does not escape the carefully guarded gates of narrative control. This is why stories with potentially explosive consequences fade so quickly. They are intentionally drowned out, pushed to the margins, or dismissed as irrelevant, even when they directly affect millions of people or have global consequences. The bias becomes obvious when you compare the treatment of Trump to that of other political figures. If a traditional politician engages in questionable actions or speaks in ways that could destabilize global alliances, the media often steps in with cautious framing, rationalizations, or even protection. The scandals are downplayed, the language softened, the focus shifted elsewhere. But when Trump is involved, the script changes depending on whether his actions align with or threaten the agenda. If he can be framed as reckless or harmful, the coverage is unrelenting. If his moves expose corruption or undermine the powerful, the silence is deafening. In this silence, the truth about media bias is revealed, not in what they say, but in what they refuse to say. This silence is powerful because it manipulates perception. People often believe that if something is not covered in the news, it must not be important. Silence functions as erasure, as though the event never happened. By refusing to report, the media controls the boundaries of public consciousness. It decides what millions will think about, what will spark debates, and what will fade into oblivion. When Trump challenges entrenched systems, threatens globalist institutions, or takes steps that would normally spark outrage against other leaders, the silence ensures that many people never even know it happened. This selective erasure serves the agendas of those who prefer to operate in the shadows, without scrutiny or accountability. The motivations behind this silence are not difficult to trace. Mainstream media outlets are deeply tied to corporate interests, political alliances, and global networks of power. Many of the same companies that own media conglomerates also benefit from certain policies, trade deals, and international arrangements. Trump's actions often threaten those arrangements by questioning their legitimacy, exposing corruption, or breaking away from the global order that benefits a select few. Silence, then, becomes a tool of protection, not for the people, but for the elites who fear exposure. By refusing to acknowledge the full consequences of Trump's actions, the media shields the very institutions that it should be holding accountable. This silence also reveals fear. Trump's ability to bypass mainstream platforms and communicate directly with the public through rallies, interviews, and social media has weakened the media's traditional power. For decades, media outlets acted as gatekeepers, controlling which voices were amplified and which were silenced. Trump shattered that model by speaking directly to millions without their filter. The silence is, in part, an attempt to reclaim control. By refusing to cover certain actions or statements, the media hopes to minimize their impact, as if ignoring them will make them irrelevant. But in reality, the opposite often happens. People notice the silence and become more suspicious, more curious, more determined to find the truth elsewhere. Silence is not neutrality. It is not objectivity. It is an active choice, a decision to shape reality by omission. When the media refuses to speak, it is sending as loud a message as when it fills the airwaves with commentary. The silence is a form of complicity, aligning itself with power rather than challenging it. It tells us what the media values, not transparency, but control, not truth, but narrative. In the case of Trump, this silence is even more glaring because his actions often cannot be easily dismissed. They are disruptive, impactful, and global in scope. For the media to remain silent in the face of such events is itself a form of confession, a confession that they are not serving the people, but the agendas of those who fear disruption. The effect of this silence spreads beyond the United States. When mainstream outlets in one country refuse to cover a story, the global networks that rely on them often follow suit. International audiences are left in the dark, and the shockwaves of Trump's actions are felt without the context that would help people understand what is happening. This global silence is even more dangerous because it ensures that entire populations remain unaware of shifts that could affect their economies, their security, or their freedoms. In this way, the silence of the media becomes a silence imposed on the world. The hypocrisy of the mainstream is also revealed by the contrast between their silence and their manufactured noise. When they choose to attack Trump, the coverage is often excessive, repetitive, and emotional. They flood the airwaves with outrage, amplifying even the smallest missteps. Yet when his actions expose corruption, shift global dynamics, or reveal uncomfortable truths about the elite, the silence is complete. This duality proves that the media is not motivated by a commitment to informing the public, but by an agenda to control what the public sees, hears, and believes. The people must uncover the truth the media won't reveal, because when silence and distortion dominate the airwaves, it is left to ordinary citizens to seek, share, and protect reality. This has become a defining struggle of our time, where information is not simply consumed but fought for, verified, and defended against. Powerful forces determined to keep the truth hidden. The mainstream outlets may choose to filter what is reported, but people have more tools than ever before to dig deeper, cross-check narratives, and find sources that tell the other side of the story. The responsibility of truth has shifted from corporate newsrooms to the collective effort of individuals who refuse to be silenced. This pursuit begins with awareness. People must first recognize that silence from the media is itself a sign of significance, a red flag that something important is being concealed. Instead of dismissing absent stories as unimportant, individuals must learn to interpret gaps in coverage as signals pointing to deeper truths. When Trump makes moves that disrupt the status quo and the media remains quiet, the very absence of reporting should spark curiosity. Why are they ignoring this? Who benefits from the silence? What are we not being told? By asking these questions, the public begins the journey of uncovering hidden realities. Social media, independent outlets, and citizen journalism have become powerful weapons in this struggle. Platforms that allow individuals to share information directly with millions have created cracks in the wall of silence. A video posted online, an eyewitness report, or a leaked document can circulate widely, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers. These channels are not perfect, as they too can be manipulated, but they give ordinary people access to perspectives and evidence that the mainstream ignores. This democratization of information has created a new kind of movement, one where people collectively piece together the truth, fact by fact, source by source, until a fuller picture emerges. Uncovering truth also requires courage. It is not easy to question narratives that are broadcast daily by powerful media corporations. People who challenge these narratives often face ridicule, censorship, or attempts to discredit their character. Yet history shows that progress has always depended on those willing to stand against the majority, to persist when told they are wrong, and to seek evidence even when it is inconvenient. Trump's ability to spark conversations outside mainstream boundaries has encouraged many to take this path, questioning what they are told and refusing to accept silence as truth. In this way, the people themselves become investigators, holding the media accountable by refusing to let important stories fade into obscurity. Community plays a vital role in this process. When individuals work alone, the task of uncovering hidden truths can seem overwhelming. But when people come together, sharing information, comparing sources, challenging each other, and building networks of trust, the search for truth gains strength. Online communities, independent forums, and grassroots groups have become hubs of investigation, where fragments of evidence are collected, analyzed, and debated until the larger story comes into view. These communities represent a new kind of journalism, one that does not rely on corporate funding or elite approval but thrives on collective effort and shared determination. The importance of uncovering truth extends beyond simply knowing facts. It shapes the very future of democracy and freedom. A society that relies blindly on media narratives is a society easily controlled. But a society where citizens think critically, seek alternative sources, and demand transparency is far harder to manipulate. When the media chooses silence, it is an attempt to maintain control. When the people uncover what is hidden, they reclaim that control. In this sense, the struggle for truth is not just about information, it is about power. Who gets to define reality? Who decides what the public knows and does not know? The answer to those questions determines the balance between elites and the people. The act of uncovering truth also builds resilience. People who have learned to question, research, and verify are less likely to fall victim to propaganda, whether it comes from the media, corporations, or governments. They develop the tools to recognize manipulation, to see through distractions, and to understand when silence is being used as a weapon. This resilience spreads across communities, creating networks of informed citizens who are no longer dependent on a single source of information. It transforms society from passive consumers of news into active seekers of reality. There is also a moral dimension to this pursuit. The truth matters because it affects lives, decisions, and futures. When media outlets remain silent about events that shape economies, foreign policies, or civil liberties, people suffer the consequences without even realizing why. Families feel the impact in their jobs, their freedoms, and their security, yet they are denied the knowledge that would help them respond. By uncovering hidden truths, ordinary people protect not only themselves but also their communities. They ensure that silence cannot be used to rob them of their voice, their choices, and their rights. The determination to uncover truth often reveals the vast gap between what people are told and what is really happening. Time and again, stories that were once dismissed as conspiracy theories or fringe ideas later prove to contain elements of reality the media refused to acknowledge. This pattern reinforces the need for vigilance. If people accept silence without question, they risk being perpetually deceived. But if they persist in seeking, questioning, and exposing, they eventually force even the mainstream to address the facts. In this way, public persistence becomes the greatest check on media silence. Technology has amplified both the challenges and opportunities of this struggle. On one hand, the media and its allies use algorithms, censorship, and fact-checking labels to suppress certain narratives. On the other hand, technology empowers individuals to connect, archive, and distribute evidence on a scale never before possible. The battle for truth is waged across these platforms daily, with silence on one side and determination on the other. The people who refuse to give in to censorship, who find creative ways to share information despite restrictions, become the front line in the defense of truth. Uncovering truth is also an act of defiance against manipulation. The elites who benefit from media silence rely on the assumption that people will remain passive, accepting whatever stories are handed to them. Every time an individual digs deeper, shares a hidden fact, or challenges a narrative, they weaken that assumption. They remind those in power that silence will not be enough to suppress reality. This constant pushback keeps the balance of power from tilting entirely in favor of the few who control the mainstream channels. The people must understand that uncovering truth is not a one-time effort but a constant responsibility. As long as silence exists, there will always be truths hidden from view. Each generation must take up the task of questioning, seeking, and revealing. Trump's actions and the media's selective silence have made this clearer than ever, showing that even in an age of endless information, access to truth requires effort. It requires refusing to accept silence as neutrality, recognizing bias, and demanding transparency from those who claim to speak for the public.